The first shot came from somewhere beyond the smoke. A violent crack tore across the frozen ground, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal being ripped apart. Inside a German tank, men suddenly realized they were no longer hunting. They were being hunted. A second shell slammed into the armor. Snow and dirt erupted around the vehicle as its commander searched desperately for the attacker. Nothing. No turret. No obvious muzzle flash. Just a low silhouette somewhere beyond the trees. Then came another shot. The German tank lurched to a stop. Somewhere inside the Soviet vehicle, a loader was already reaching for another 100mm round. The gunner stared through his sight, waiting for the next target to appear. The enemy had brought Tigers and Panthers to dominate the battlefield. The Soviets had brought something smaller, lower, faster, and built around one terrifying idea. See the enemy first, hit him hard, and disappear before he could answer. But this machine was never supposed to exist. A year earlier, the Red Army had been facing a dangerous problem. Soviet tanks were becoming better, but German armor was evolving even faster. The battlefield had changed. The old Soviet anti-tank guns that had once been enough were beginning to struggle against heavier German protection. The T-34 remained one of the most important tanks in the war, but its earlier 76mm gun could no longer dominate every engagement. The Su-85 had improved the situation by placing an 85mm gun into a casemate on the T-34 chassis, but the arrival and increasing use of German Panthers and Tigers created a new demand. Soviet commanders needed a weapon that could reach across open ground and punch through German armor before the enemy could close the distance. The answer would not be another enormous heavy tank. It would be a tank destroyer built around a gun powerful enough to make a Tiger crew think twice about advancing. The story begins in the Soviet Union in 1943, when the Red Army was learning some brutal lessons from the Eastern Front. German armored formations had demonstrated that a well-protected tank, positioned correctly and supported by infantry and artillery, could become a nightmare to attack. The Tiger I carried an 88mm gun capable of engaging Soviet armor at long distances. The Panther introduced a combination of sloped armor, high velocity, and mobility that made it especially dangerous. Soviet crews could still destroy these machines, but doing so often required favorable terrain, artillery support, multiple tanks, or dangerously close ranges. The Soviet answer had to be practical. It had to use existing industrial capacity. It had to be produced quickly. And above all, it needed a gun that could threaten the newest German tanks without forcing the Red Army to wait years for an entirely new vehicle. That requirement pointed directly toward Uralmash. The Ural heavy machine building plant, known as UZTM or Uralmash, stood in Sverdlovsk in the Urals, far from the front line. During the war, the factory had become part of the enormous Soviet industrial machine that had been moved eastward after the German invasion. It was not a quiet place. Machinery ran constantly. Steel was cut, shaped, welded, and assembled while the war demanded more equipment every month. Uralmash had already gained experience producing T-34 components and self-propelled guns. Its design bureau, led by Lev Gorlitsky, had been working on Soviet self-propelled artillery since 1942. Gorlitsky was not designing from a clean sheet of paper. He was working with a battlefield reality that punished unnecessary complexity. His vehicles needed to be assembled quickly, repaired quickly, and sent back into battle quickly. The Su-122 had taught the design team what worked and what didn't. The Su-85 had taken the same basic concept and turned it into a dedicated tank destroyer. Now the Red Army wanted something more powerful. The first proposals involved mounting 100mm guns on existing Soviet chassis. But this was where engineering collided with urgency. A bigger gun meant more recoil. More recoil meant a stronger mounting system. A longer gun could change the vehicle's balance. The ammunition was larger. The fighting compartment had to accommodate the weapon and its crew. And every modification threatened the greatest advantage of the T-34 family, mass production. The engineers were not simply asking, can we fit a 100mm gun inside? They were asking, can we fit it inside a vehicle that Soviet factories can actually build in wartime? That distinction mattered. Because a brilliant prototype that existed in single digits was not enough. The Red Army needed hundreds, then thousands. The weapon chosen for the project was the D-10, a 100mm gun developed by the Design Bureau at Plant No. 9 under F.F. Petrov, with the D-10S variant adapted for self-propelled installation. Its development was part of a wider Soviet effort to create more powerful anti-tank artillery. The gun's long barrel and high muzzle velocity gave it the performance the Su-100 needed. But placing it on the T-34 chassis was still a difficult engineering problem. The designers had to preserve the vehicle's mobility while creating enough space for the weapon and its ammunition. They also had to protect the crew. The result was a vehicle that looked familiar but felt fundamentally different. The T-34's turret was gone. In its place was a fixed, sloped armored fighting compartment. The layout made the vehicle lower than a turreted tank and simplified production, but it also imposed limitations. The gun could not rotate freely through a full circle. The entire vehicle had to turn to change the direction of fire significantly. That meant the crew needed to plan its firing position carefully. SU-100 could not simply swing its turret toward a threat. It had to be pointed correctly before the enemy arrived. Yet the limitation came with a powerful advantage. The fixed casemate allowed the engineers to install a large gun without creating the complexity and weight of a full rotating turret. The vehicle remained compact, relatively mobile, and based on a proven chassis. But there was another problem. The gun was so long that the front of the vehicle became heavily loaded. The design team had to make adjustments to the suspension and hull while maintaining reliability. The vehicle's gun barrel also extended far beyond the front of the hull, creating a new hazard when crossing rough terrain. A sudden dip could drive the barrel into the earth. A tight turn could leave the weapon dangerously close to obstacles. The crew had to learn the machine's physical limits the hard way. Then came the trials. The prototype was tested, modified, tested again, and modified again. The Soviet government wanted production as quickly as possible. Frontline commanders wanted more firepower. Factory workers needed designs that could actually be manufactured under wartime conditions. And engineers were caught between all three demands. Every day spent fixing a problem was another day German tanks remained ahead of the battlefield. Every shortcut risked creating a vehicle that might fail when its crew needed it most. But the most important test would not happen inside a factory. It would happen against German armor. By the middle of 1944, the Red Army had changed dramatically from the force that had struggled during the opening years of Operation Barbarossa. Soviet industry was producing enormous quantities of tanks and artillery. Operations such as Bagration were smashing German formations across enormous stretches of the Eastern Front. Soviet armies were advancing west. But the Germans were still dangerous. Panther and Tiger crews could exploit long sight lines, prepared positions, and ambushes. A Soviet tank destroyer needed to close that technological gap. The SU-100 was approved for production in 1944, and the first vehicles entered service in the autumn. The timing was crucial. The war had entered its final but most violent stage. Soviet forces were moving toward Eastern Europe, and German armies were increasingly fighting defensive battles. That created exactly the environment in which a tank destroyer could become deadly. A defensive position offered concealment. A concealed SU-100 could wait. It did not need to expose itself until a German tank entered the gunner's sight. And then the 100mm gun could do what the vehicle had been designed to do. The first operational crews did not need to be convinced that the SU-100 was powerful. They could feel it when the weapon fired. The recoil slammed through the hull. Smoke filled the fighting compartment. The enormous shell disappeared downrange. Outside, the blast kicked dust into the air. The crew immediately had another problem: reload. A tank destroyer with one powerful gun was only as dangerous as the crew operating it. The loader had to wrestle a heavy round into position while the vehicle remained exposed. The gunner had to reacquire the target. The commander had to search for other threats. The driver needed to be ready to move. There was no room for hesitation. The SU-100's armor was strongest at the front, with the sloped casemate providing useful protection, but it was not a heavily armored monster. Its survivability depended heavily on positioning and tactics. The vehicle could not afford to fight like an IS-2 in a slugging match. It had to exploit its strengths: concealment, distance, firepower, mobility, and timing. That was when the nickname Tiger Hunter began to make sense, not because the SU-100 was invincible against Tigers, but because its weapon gave Soviet crews a serious answer to German heavy armor. The real surprise came when the SU-100 was asked to do something beyond hunting tanks. The battlefield didn't always provide the perfect target. Sometimes the enemy was a bunker. Sometimes it was an armored vehicle hidden behind a village. Sometimes it was infantry supported by field fortifications. The 100mm gun could fire high-explosive ammunition as well as armor-piercing rounds, giving the vehicle a wider battlefield role than the phrase "tank destroyer" suggested. Yet its greatest reputation would come from direct fire engagements with German armor. And there was one enemy that Soviet crews particularly wanted to avoid fighting carelessly: The Tiger II. The King Tiger carried extremely thick frontal armor and a powerful 88mm gun. Even the SU-100's 100mm weapon could not simply erase the advantages of such a machine. Range, angle, ammunition type, and target location mattered. The Soviet crews needed to choose their shots carefully. A bad decision could turn the hunter into the hunted. This was the central paradox of the SU-100. Its gun was powerful enough to destroy some of the most dangerous German tanks, but its own protection was nowhere near enough to make it comfortable in a prolonged firefight. The vehicle had teeth, but it did not have the armor to stand still and let the enemy bite back. That limitation shaped how experienced crews used it. They sought cover. They exploited terrain. They fired from positions where the German tank had difficulty responding. Then they moved. The doctrine was brutally simple: strike first, strike hard, and never give the enemy a clean second shot. By late 1944, SU-100s were reaching Soviet formations as the Red Army advanced into Poland, Hungary, and the Balkans. The crews entered a battlefield where villages, forests, muddy roads, and open agricultural fields created endless ambush opportunities. In the winter, snow concealed tracks but also made movement more difficult. In muddy conditions, the T-34 derived suspension and engine gave the SU-100 valuable mobility, but every heavy vehicle could become trapped when roads turned into deep mud. The men inside the casemate were fighting the weather as much as the enemy. The vehicle's V2 diesel engine produced roughly 500 horsepower, giving the SU-100 a useful combination of mobility and power. It was not the fastest armored vehicle in the war, but it could move with the Soviet formations it was designed to support. And that mattered because the Red Army's advances were becoming increasingly rapid. A tank destroyer that could not keep up was useless. A gun that could not be brought to the battlefield in sufficient numbers was irrelevant. The SU-100 succeeded because it balanced firepower with a chassis Soviet industry already understood. That was the hidden brilliance of the design. It was not a technological miracle like some experimental German projects. It was something more dangerous in a total war: practical. The engineers took a proven platform, removed what they did not need, strengthened what mattered, and installed a gun powerful enough to change the tactical equation. But the next battlefield would test that philosophy under some of the most difficult conditions of the war. Hungary, March 1945. German forces launched Operation Frühlingserwachen, the Spring Awakening Offensive, in the area around Lake Balaton. It was one of Germany's final major offensives of World War II. The German army was running out of time, but it was still capable of concentrating significant armored forces. Soviet troops faced Panthers, Tigers, and other armored vehicles in terrain that could become a nightmare of mud and flooded ground. The Germans expected to break through. The Soviets needed to stop them. SU-100s entered the fighting. Their crews were not searching for glory. They were looking for targets. A distant silhouette appeared through mist. The commander studied it. The gunner adjusted the sight. The vehicle remained still. This was where the SU-100 made sense. A moving tank was easier to spot. A concealed tank destroyer could remain invisible until the moment it fired. The German vehicle advanced. The Soviet gun fired. The battlefield erupted. Then the SU-100 moved before the enemy could accurately locate the firing position. Again and again. The battle around Lake Balaton demonstrated both the power and the limits of the machine. German armored formations remained dangerous, and Soviet crews could not simply drive forward without support. Mines, artillery, infantry, anti-tank guns, and enemy tanks all threatened the advance. But the SU-100 gave Soviet commanders a valuable tool: a relatively mobile vehicle with a gun capable of defeating many German armored threats at useful ranges. The fighting was brutal. Mud slowed vehicles. Roads became clogged with wrecked equipment. Visibility changed from 1 hour to the next. A crew might spend minutes staring into an apparently empty field before a German tank suddenly appeared. In those moments, the first shot mattered more than almost anything else. Yet the SU-100 had another weakness that became increasingly important. The casemate layout limited the gun's traverse. If an enemy appeared unexpectedly from the side, the vehicle could not simply rotate its gun like a turreted tank. The driver had to turn the entire vehicle. That could take precious seconds. Against a fast enemy, those seconds could decide whether the SU-100 survived. The commander therefore had to think ahead. Every firing position had to account for possible approach routes. Every ambush had to be planned around the weapon's limited traverse. The machine rewarded discipline and punished carelessness. This was not a tank for improvising after the enemy had already reached your flank. It was a weapon for creating the conditions of the engagement before the engagement began. And then came another problem. The long barrel that gave the SU-100 its power could become a liability in forests, villages, and broken terrain. The gun could strike trees or obstacles. The vehicle could become awkward in tight spaces. In open country, however, that same barrel became an advantage. Long sight lines were exactly what the SU-100 wanted. The further away the German tank, the more valuable the combination of high velocity and accurate fire became. This is why the machine's reputation cannot be reduced to raw penetration figures. Its effectiveness depended on the crew, terrain, ammunition, visibility, and tactical situation. A technically powerful gun did not guarantee victory. The men had to create the opportunity to use it. The Soviet advance continued. German forces were pushed backward toward their own territory. The SU-100 followed the Red Army into Poland and then toward Germany. By early 1945, the machine was appearing in increasing numbers. But the war was moving too quickly for the SU-100 to become the sole answer to German armor. The Soviets had T-34-85S, IS-2 heavy tanks, ISU assault guns, artillery, aircraft, and huge numbers of other armored vehicles. The SU-100 was one component in a massive combined arms system. That fact is often lost when individual machines become legends. The SU-100 did not defeat the German army alone. It helped give Soviet formations another option when they encountered heavily armored resistance. And there was a fascinating irony in its design. The machine was created because the T-34's gun was no longer enough. Yet the SU-100 kept the T-34's basic chassis rather than replacing the entire vehicle. Instead of waiting for an entirely new platform, Soviet engineers adapted what already existed. In a war where factories were under enormous pressure, that decision could save months. And months were worth more than almost anything. The German army had its own engineering answer to the problem of Soviet mass production. Bigger guns, thicker armor, more complex vehicles. The Soviet answer was often different. Use enough firepower, put it on a proven chassis, build it quickly, and put it into the hands of crews who can use it effectively. The SU-100 embodied that philosophy. But the war had one final chapter for it. In April 1945, Soviet forces reached Berlin. The city became a maze of rubble, barricades, buildings, cellars, and narrow streets. A vehicle designed to exploit long-range engagements suddenly found itself in an environment where its biggest advantages were harder to use. The SU-100 could still destroy enemy armor, but urban combat reduced visibility and made the limited gun traverse more dangerous. German defenders could attack from unexpected angles. Buildings blocked sight lines. Infantry became essential. A tank destroyer alone could not clear a street. The SU-100's crews had to work alongside infantry and other armored vehicles. This was the final lesson of the war. No matter how powerful the gun, the battlefield always found a way to expose weaknesses. The German surrender in May 1945 ended the war in Europe, but the SU-100 did not disappear. Production continued into the post-war period, and the vehicle remained in Soviet service for decades. Its 100mm gun had an even longer life. The D-10 family would later be adapted into tank guns including the D-10T series and would become famously associated with the T-54 and T-55 medium tanks. A weapon created during the desperation of the Eastern Front was becoming part of an entirely new generation of armored warfare. The SU-100 itself also spread beyond the Soviet Union. Post-war operators included countries across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Some remained in service long after World War II had become history. That was perhaps the most convincing proof that the design had worked. It wasn't merely a wartime improvisation that became obsolete as soon as Germany surrendered. It had enough mobility, firepower, reliability, and adaptability to remain useful in a rapidly changing world. But there is another story hidden inside the SU-100's history. The machine that entered production was not the only future Soviet engineers imagined. Uralmash explored further development of the concept, including vehicles intended to overcome the problems created by the traditional forward fighting compartment. The SU-100M1 and SU-100M2 projects experimented with different layouts, while the later SU-101, sometimes called Uralmash 1, placed the fighting compartment toward the rear. These designs never replaced the wartime SU-100 in large-scale service, but they revealed what the engineers had learned. The basic concept was sound. The layout could be improved. The war had given Soviet designers a long list of lessons, and they were already thinking about the next generation. That is where the story becomes more interesting than a simple tale of a tank destroyer hunting tigers. The SU-100 was not the end of Soviet self-propelled gun development. It was a bridge. It connected the desperate tank-killing requirements of 1944 with the post-war world of high-velocity tank guns and new armored platforms. The D-10 family would continue far beyond the battlefield that created it. Its descendants would arm tanks that defined Soviet and Warsaw Pact armored forces during the early Cold War. In that sense, the SU-100 was not merely a weapon built for one war. It was a technological stepping stone. And yet the machine had never been designed to be glamorous. It had no rotating turret, no enormous armor package, no monstrous engine, no revolutionary suspension. Its silhouette was low and angular. Its interior was cramped. Its crew worked in a fighting compartment where every movement mattered. The vehicle was not comfortable. It was not elegant. It was a machine built around necessity. That may be why its story has lasted. The SU-100 represented the brutal logic of wartime engineering. When the enemy built a better tank, you needed a better gun. When time was limited, you used an existing chassis. When factories were overloaded, you simplified production. When the vehicle couldn't survive a prolonged firefight, you changed the tactics. The result was a tank destroyer capable of threatening some of the most feared German armored vehicles of the war. But the myth that it simply hunted Tigers misses the deeper story. The SU-100 was hunting a problem. The problem was time. Germany had introduced increasingly powerful tanks, and the Soviet Union needed an answer before the war ended. The SU-100 arrived late, entering combat in the final year of the conflict, but late did not mean irrelevant. Its appearance coincided with the Red Army's greatest advances. It fought in Hungary. It moved through Poland. It participated in the final battles of the Eastern Front. And it carried a weapon whose descendants would remain important long after the last German tank had surrendered. The battlefield eventually fell silent. The factories slowed. The crews went home. The SU-100s that survived the war were painted, repaired, stored, transferred, or sent abroad. Some eventually became museum pieces. Others continued serving in armies that had never existed when the first prototype was built. Decades later, surviving examples would still sit quietly on museum grounds, their barrels frozen toward horizons that no longer contained Panthers or Tigers. Visitors would walk around them and see only an old Soviet armored vehicle. But look closer and the scars tell a different story. The welds, the sloped armor, the massive gun, the cramped fighting compartment. Every feature was an answer to a problem created by war. The SU-100 was never invulnerable. Its armor could be penetrated. Its ammunition could be dangerous. Its gun could become awkward in close combat. Its crew could be killed in seconds. But when it occupied the right ground, when the commander chose the right moment, and when the gunner placed that 100mm round where it needed to go, the balance could change instantly. That was its real power. Not invincibility. Not speed. Not some magical ability to destroy every German tank. Timing. The SU-100 was a machine that turned patience into firepower. It waited in the trees. It waited behind a ridge. It waited at the edge of a village. Somewhere in the distance, a German tank appeared. The commander watched. The gunner adjusted. The loader prepared the next round. For one brief moment, the entire war narrowed down to a single sight picture. Then the order came. Fire. The 100mm gun erupted. And somewhere beyond the smoke, another Tiger hunter had done what it was built to do. The SU-100 disappeared into history not because it was the biggest or most sophisticated armored vehicle of World War II, but because it arrived when the Red Army needed exactly what it offered. A powerful gun on a proven chassis. A practical answer to a dangerous enemy. A weapon designed not to look impressive, but to survive the battlefield long enough to make its one decisive shot. The Tigers are gone. The Panthers are gone. The Eastern Front has become photographs, ruins, and names on maps. But the machine built to hunt them still survives in museums around the world. Its gun remains pointed toward a war that ended more than 80 years ago. And in that silent steel silhouette is a lesson the battlefield taught Soviet engineers the hard way. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon is not the machine that can take the most punishment. It is the one that can find you first, strike before you are ready, and vanish before you can answer. The SU-100 did not need to be the strongest tank on the battlefield. It only needed one good position, one clear target, and one round fired at exactly the right moment. For the men inside it, that moment could mean the difference between becoming another wreck on the Eastern Front, or driving away while the enemy burned behind them. And that is why the SU-100 became more than another Soviet self-propelled gun. It became the quiet hunter of the final years of the Eastern Front, a machine born from urgency, refined by engineers, tested by war, and remembered because when the biggest German tanks appeared on the horizon, the Red Army finally had a weapon built to answer them. The SU-100 evolved from the SU-85 on the T-34-85 chassis. The 100mm D-10S was developed for the vehicle, and the design is closely associated with Uralmash and Lev Gorlitsky's designed Euro. It entered service in late 1944 and saw extensive combat in the final year of World War II, including Hungary and the advance into Germany.